Motorcycles, cars, music, three things that I grew up in, and I'm blessed enough to be able to continue.
Before we get into it, one honest note. There is no interview, no press release, and no public statement where Danny Koker has ever sat down and named the worst employees of counting cars. That framing gets thrown around online, but it isn't something that actually happened. What did happen, over 10 seasons of the show, was a series of real departures. Some explained on camera, some explained years later in interviews, and a couple that were never explained at all. This is a look at what's actually documented about each of them, and what's just fan speculation that's been repeated so many times it starts to sound like fact. Count's Kustoms wasn't invented for television. Danny Koker, most fans know him as the Count, built the shop in Las Vegas years before History Channel came calling, originally so he'd have somewhere to work on his own cars without waiting in line at someone else's garage. Koker grew up around cars and music in Cleveland and Detroit, in a family with deep ties to the Ford Motor Company, and by the time he was an adult, he'd already spent years as a self-taught mechanic and a local Las Vegas television personality, hosting a late-night horror movie segment as Count Cool Rider. His break into national television came sideways, through Pawn Stars. Koker was brought on as a recurring car and motorcycle expert for the Harrison family shop, and audiences responded to him immediately. History Channel spun that popularity into its own series, and Counting Cars debuted in August 2012, built entirely around Koker, his crew, and the custom builds rolling through Count's Kustoms. The show ran for 10 seasons, ending in 2020. Some sources say the final new episodes aired into 2021. Contrary to some of the rumors that circulate now, there's no evidence the show ended because of scandal, legal trouble, or any falling out involving Koker himself. Multiple entertainment outlets that have covered the show's ending point to the far more ordinary explanation for most long-running reality series. Ratings declined over time, production costs were high, and after nearly a decade the format had simply run its course. Some viewers also felt the later seasons leaned more heavily into manufactured-feeling drama and less into the actual craftsmanship that made the show distinctive early on, a common complaint about long-running build shows in general, and one that likely fed into the ratings slide rather than being separate from it. Koker himself never really stopped being the Count once cameras left the shop. Alongside running Count's Kustoms, he built out a small constellation of side ventures that carried the same rock and roll, car culture identity. Count's Vamp Rock Bar and Grill, a Las Vegas venue for live music, which has since closed. Count's Tattoo Company, and his band Count 77, which continues to perform. More recently, he's moved back toward media with Count's Culture, a talk show format released through podcast platforms and YouTube that mixes conversation about cars, music, and counterculture in a looser, more relaxed format than the original series. In interviews since the show ended, Koker has said he's had conversations about a return to television, though nothing concrete has been announced. It's worth pausing on that, because a fair amount of online chatter has painted a much darker picture of Koker's life after Counting Cars. Rumors about serious illness, legal trouble, or even prison time have circulated for years. None of that holds up against actual reporting. Koker's alive, still runs a shop, and the more grounded explanation for any visible changes in his appearance over the years is the same one that applies to plenty of people running demanding small businesses. Long hours in the ordinary way of running a public-facing company for over a decade, not a hidden diagnosis nobody's confirmed. That backdrop matters, because it's easy to look at a decade of cast changes and assume something sinister connects all of them. In reality, the reasons people left range from a genuine legal dispute to a family relocation, to just fading off screen as the show's focus shifted. And in a couple cases, nobody outside the shop actually knows for sure. Part of why fans latched onto every departure as a potential scandal comes down to how the show itself was built. Counting Cars followed a format similar to history's other build shows. Real cars, real deadlines, real money on the line, compressed into 30-minute episodes. The actual restoration work, disassembling frames, welding, upholstery, tracking down rare parts, painting, took months per build. What audiences saw was a condensed version of that timeline, not a fabricated one. The builds and the financial stakes were real. But condensing months of real work into minutes of television means editing choices matter enormously. A disagreement over a parts budget that lasted 5 minutes on a random Tuesday could easily be cut to look like a season-defining blow-up. A person who was simply busy with other projects that season could look, through editing alone, like someone being quietly frozen out. That doesn't mean every rumor about tension in the shop is false. Running a business with six-figure custom builds, tight deadlines, and a rotating cast of strong personalities is genuinely stressful, and it would be surprising if there was never any friction at all. It just means viewers were watching a produced, edited version of that friction, not a documentary record of it. And it's worth keeping that in mind before assuming the most dramatic explanation for any given cast member's reduced screen time. There's also a simpler structural reason cast turnover felt more dramatic on Counting Cars than it might on a scripted show. The people on screen were real employees with real jobs outside the cameras. When someone's role changed or they took on other work or their priorities shifted, it showed up as a change in screen time with no built-in narrative explanation, because there wasn't a script writer assigned to give the audience closure. Real life doesn't always come with a wrap-up scene. If there's a single cast departure from Counting Cars that isn't rumor, that shows up in actual court filings, it's Joseph Frontiera's. Frontiera wasn't a mechanic, a painter, or a detailer. He worked behind the scenes as a bookkeeper, brought in to manage the shop's finances, payroll, expenses, and the day-to-day accounting that keeps a business built around six-figure custom builds running smoothly. Most viewers wouldn't have recognized his face, because his job kept him out of the spotlight the rest of the crew lived in. In 2017, that changed. Reporting on the case describes a lawsuit filed against Frontiera accusing him of misusing roughly $75,000 in company funds for personal expenses, including a down payment on a vehicle and airline travel. On top of the alleged theft itself, the shop was reportedly stuck with an additional tax penalty of around $18,000 tied to the financial mismanagement. Koker didn't stay quiet about this one the way he did with some of the other departures. He removed Frontiera and pursued legal action. What's worth separating out here is fact from atmosphere. The lawsuit and the dollar figures are part of the public record and have been reported by multiple outlets. What isn't public is exactly how the case was resolved, what Frontiera's side of the story was, or whether he ever spoke publicly about it afterward. He largely didn't. So while this is the most concretely documented exit of anyone who's left Counts Kustoms, plenty of the finer details remain genuinely unknown, rather than just sealed for drama. It's also worth noting, since it comes up in fan discussion, that a separate and different crew member, the shop's painter Ryan Evans, has at times been wrongly rumored to be connected to embezzlement allegations. That appears to be a case of fans mixing up names. Evans has continued working at Counts Kustoms, and there's no credible reporting tying him to the Frontiera matter at all. If anything, the fact that this mix-up spread as widely as it did says something about how these stories tend to travel online. A real scandal involving one employee gets loosely reattached to whichever other name a viewer half remembers, and the incorrect version keeps circulating long after the correct one is a matter of public record. The Frontiera case also matters for a reason beyond the dollar figure. Counts Kustoms, like a lot of small, owner-run shops, presented itself, on and off screen, as something closer to a family than a typical corporate workplace. That framing makes a bookkeeper allegedly forging signatures and misrepresenting the book's land differently than it would at a larger company with layers of internal auditing. Whatever the full resolution of the lawsuit turned out to be, the incident is the closest thing the show ever had to a genuine institutional crisis, rather than the kind of personality friction that made for good editing but didn't actually threaten the business. Of everyone who left the show early, Scott Jones's exit is one of the least mysterious. Even though it's often talked about like a big unsolved question, Jones worked as the shop's bookkeeper and a facto numbers guy in the first couple of seasons, playing the role of the person willing to tell Koker no when a project was running over budget or behind schedule. That tension made for good television. Koker wanted to chase the ambitious build. Jones wanted to protect the bottom line. But it wasn't personal animosity so much as two different jobs pulling in different directions. Jones left the show between seasons 2 and 3, and unlike most of the other exits on this list, the show actually addressed it directly. The season 3 premiere explained that Jones and his family had relocated to Tennessee following the birth of his son, so he could be closer to family. That's it. There's no lawsuit, no on-camera blow-up, no unresolved rumor, with any real evidence behind it. Some fans have speculated over the years about creative differences or friction with Koker, but nothing in the public record supports that. the most reliable explanation remains the one the show itself gave. He prioritized his family over the job. Rolly Sabo, the Hungarian-born detailer nicknamed Rock and Rolley, is a different story, because here the honest answer is that nobody outside the shop seemed to actually know why he left. Sabo appeared from the very first episode to around season 6, working as a cruise detailer and providing a lot of the show's comic relief with his accent and personality. Then he stopped appearing, without an on-camera explanation. In 2017, there were credible local news reports that Sabo's trailer, containing thousands of dollars of his own detailing equipment, was stolen, which was a real, financially painful event for him regardless of anything happening at the shop. From there, the record gets thin. Some fan theories suggest he was let go after friction with the crew or production. Others suggest he chose to leave and start his own business. Coverage of his post-show life is consistent on one point. He opened his own detailing operation in Las Vegas, Rock and Rolley Custom Detailing, and by most accounts it's done well, especially in the years leading up to the pandemic. What's not consistent, and isn't actually backed by any on-record statement from Sabo or Koker, is why he left the show in the first place. He simply never addressed it publicly. Anyone telling you with certainty that he was fired, or that he quit over a specific dispute, is filling in a gap with a guess, an understandable one, given how abrupt his exit looked on screen, but a guess all the same.